my name is Frederik, and I'm the CEO and founder of Profitmetrics. We are a Danish company, but remote first, so we have people all over the world. And today I'm going to talk about how ROAS is vanity and POAS is sanity, but essentially talk about how ad measurement can align with actual bottom line profit optimization. And a quick intro to me, I've been in e-commerce for the last 20 years, primarily as an e-commerce owner for 13 years before I started Profitmetrics. We are working with thousands of e-commerce companies and agencies around the world. But before I go into explaining what Profitmetrics is and the problems we believe so much in solving, I would like to explain or tell a little story of why I invented Profitmetrics. Back in 2015, I had one of Denmark's fastest growing e-commerce companies. We had around 400,000 email subscribers. We were using 2,000 to 4,000 euros on a platform like Facebook daily. And back in 2015, you were not allowed to do direct selling as we know it today on Facebook. That was like a branding platform, but we did a lot of direct selling. So Facebook liked that. So we did the first Scandinavian case study with Facebook over in Dublin because he would love if more e-commerce businesses were using so much money. I know today it's not that much money in terms of ad spend, but it was at that point. I was scaling very fast. I was using a ton of ad spend on Google and Facebook. I didn't really know and understand my numbers before I got a P&L back. And I got then a P&L back from my accountant and something didn't add up. So I got another accounting agency to go over it. So I was lacking my financial reports for around 4 to 5 months. But I was hitting my target ROAS. I was growing every single month. So I was just keep on scaling whatever hit that target ROAS. But then I got these numbers back from the new accountant, and where I thought I was in a big plus, I was actually in a big minus. And essentially what happened was that I was using a target ROAS, but introduced other products. So my margin changed, and I was not really careful about the double attribution and those sort of things. So now that I knew I was in a big minus, I had to do something. And the only thing I really could do was to turn down the ad spend. But then I got a huge cash flow problem. And essentially it went so bad that I went bankrupt. I couldn't save the company fast enough, or I couldn't recoup that money fast enough. But luckily I found an investor who believed in the idea. So we bought up the bankruptcy. We paid out all the creditors. No customers was harmed. And I started over right away. And this were where I started focusing on, hey, Andrew, I'm just freestyling here.
I love it. Well, I'm so glad that you're here. Apologies to everyone for my late arrival with a little technical issue. Never had this technical issue, but apparently the Zoom situation in terms of coming online for a co-host is brand new, which is why I was having a heck of a hard time. So, Frederik, I'm so glad that you're here. Thank you for being here, and
Thank you.
continue to take it away. But I'm here, and we'll chime thing or we'll kind of go through questions at the end, and we can talk through it a little bit.
Yeah.
And so I appreciate those of you that are here, and for those of you watching the recording, we're glad to have you as well.
Thank you. So essentially what happened was I couldn't save this company. I went bankrupt, but we started up again, and yeah, no customers were harmed. No one was really harmed because that investor paid out the creditors. But this were where I started thinking, what the hell went wrong? And one thing was I was waiting for a P&L coming back from my accountant. And I was thinking, I have cost of goods. I have all my invoices. I have everything there, but it's just not structured in a way so I can click on a button and see how much profit I made the last week or today. So I know exactly how fast I can scale, or the profitability allowed me to. There was nothing there. So I was thinking, okay, here there is something I really need. And then again, I also looked at what the hell are we doing in e-commerce? We are using return on ad spend, but we don't have return. So we are sending in revenue, and then we calculate some kind of average margin up against ad spend, but we are not really ever making the same margin. And what happened in my case was I was selling products or introducing products with lower margin but high revenue. Why are we not sending in the real profit up against ad spend? So it's apples to apples, and there was no tool out there. So I got two of my developers to build like a very primitive tool, but it worked. And what essentially happened was I could see exactly which ads or campaigns were making me money. I could see which one was losing me money, so I could turn that down. And I always had, with a click of a button, an overview of how much contribution margin, how much profit have I made today or the last week. So I always knew if I was too aggressive or too conservative. And this essentially changed the whole business. It went from that bankruptcy to a turnaround where suddenly I had a healthy and profitable business. Um, so I decided to make an exit and made a pretty good exit. And that money I use for making profit metrics into a product, because I thought that, yeah, maybe people do not have necessarily such a big problem as myself going bankrupt, but this is something that all e-commerce marketers or e-commerce businesses, they have these problems. And that is a little bit over 6.5 years ago. And that was why I started Profit Metrics and why I'm here. And from that time going forward, my mission and Profit Metrics mission have really been going away from that only revenue centric focus to also having an understanding of the profit, because those two things go hand in hand. And if you only have the revenue, you can scale to a certain point, but at some point you end up in some kind of trouble, like myself. So this has been, yeah, the mission of Profit Metrics, getting this out to as many people and many marketers as possible to really understand their numbers and their back end profitability. And if we look at the real problem of return on ad spend, as I was a little bit talking about, it's not that return on ad spend is wrong, but return in any P&L is profit. It's definitely not revenue. So many of you, when you're essentially setting target ROAS, if it's in Meta or it's Google, you have to make some kind of average margin calculation. So this is a very typical e-commerce business, selling different products with different margins. Something maybe breaks even at around 3, something at 9, and maybe there's something at 20 that could be liquidation or super high discounts. So what kind of target ROAS would most normally set? Maybe something around 10, because then we would be winning on all orders except this one, but this is something where we already know that we are losing on. But the problem by setting something like 10 is, yeah, there will be made a profit on every single conversion coming through. But if this only needed 3, that would also have been profitable at 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So we are actually leaving a lot of profitable volume on the table. And this is often what is holding us back from actually scaling accounts. We can see 2 exact same revenue orders here. The algorithms in Google and Meta or the marketer would see them as exact the same if we only have revenue. But if we actually look at the calculated profit, we can see they are very different. We can be much more aggressive on this one than this one. And the way I essentially tried to solve that, and which I know that many are doing, is they would essentially say, and let's say it was Meta, we are doing an advertising for this t-shirt. We know the margin, so we essentially just calculate a break-even ROAS, and everything above that we will scale. And if we only had one product without any discount or any free shipping, that would also be okay. But the reality is just that's not how consumers buy. Some would buy only that t-shirt. Some would buy other t-shirts and hats with it. Some would maybe take some pants. And the way I did it in the past, and many are doing it, we would essentially just look at all revenue coming in, having the same margin as that advertised product you're clicking on. But if we are looking at the real profit, we can see order 2 is actually much more profitable, 25% more. The pants is 65% more profitable than using the average from that t-shirt. And in this case, we would again leave a lot of profitable volume on the table. What happened in my story was the opposite way around. I was marketing the high margin product, and people ended up buying a lot of the lower margin products, showing a lot of nice revenue, and I was scaling that. But essentially, I found out that was unprofitable. And that was essentially what I scaled myself into a bankruptcy. And this is why I came up with, and hopefully some of you have heard about the KPI POAS, but I came up with a KPI called POAS, and we trademarked that around the world. Many other softwares and so on are also using it. They're not allowed to, but essentially for us, it's more having a way of differentiating it away from what return on ad spend is today and making it more of what it was supposed to be, return profit. So this is profit on ad spend. cool thing about POAS is when we are working within a channel, let's say Meta, we always know break even is one. If we make $10,000 after discount codes, cost of goods, shipping, packaging, handling, returns, we can use $10,000 to break even. So everything above one in that platform is essentially profitable. And this just makes it so much easier to align the marketing with real business goals. So if there is a business where maybe we need to maximize the bottom line the next quarter, maybe we go for two. So we essentially get $2 back, but in profit every time we use one. Can also just be profitable growth. We go for 1.5. So we would get $1.50 back whenever we put $1 in, but in profit. But it can also be used for top line growth or new customer acquisition because we are coming back to the apples to apples. If we wanted to be let's say we wanted to break even on new customer acquisition, and we know it's actually new customers, if we are making a lot of profit and there's more volume, the algorithms and the marketers can be much more aggressive and pushing out more volume of it. But again, we will also know if we are losing too much. So it just allows us to come so much closer to what we actually want using profit rather than revenue. So it just aligns real business goals with marketing targets. And the way, if you are doing some POAS yourself or profit bidding or how we're doing it, it always have to be based on the actual attributed order. So we need to look at the order. What have the customer paid after VAT, taxes, discounts? Have the customer paid something in shipping? Here there's zero shipping, free shipping, but we still have 6.2 euros sending that out from the warehouse. There is the cost prices that need to be looked up. We get them from within, for example, Shopify or Magento or a feed. There is the payment fees. So PayPal much more expensive than a credit card, Klarna, so on. Shipping also, private delivery versus a pickup point can have very different costs, or heavy order versus a light order, or certain zip codes or states. Handling fees or handling and packaging can also be different. But we calculate that profit on the order, and then we send it back to the ad click. So we send it server side into the different ad channels like Google, GA4, Meta, and so on. We send it server side just to get better tracking, but it's also no one wants this data to be in some data layer where a competitor or customer can see it. So it needs to be hidden being sent in. But once that is in the platforms, that is where the magic happens, because that's where you can suddenly optimize with the profit. So where you only normally have the revenue, the ROAS, still have that, but now you also have the gross profit, the net profit, the POAS. So you can actually see if we get put in one, we get two back, but in profit. So you can start adjusting your target ROAS based on revenue, or you can even optimize for it in Google. The same we do in Meta. So you can get the columns in, so you can actually make decision based on profit. In Meta, you can also optimize with profit. We have for a long time taken over that purchase event, but now Meta actually have this closed beta where we have been working very closely with Meta, building this out in terms of we have given a lot of sent a lot of clients where they have tested out the algorithm and tried, and in the start it didn't really work, and then they moved on. But what is, if you can get this enabled, and if someone wants this enabled, you can also write to me, and I'm pretty sure I can get Meta to open it. It's not open for everyone yet, but here you can essentially choose on a campaign if you want to optimize for revenue or profit. We also just released together with Meta and a client the first success story with this functionality, where they were optimizing maximize conversions versus value-based bidding, but profit. And what we saw was an average profit per order increased by 18%, and the marginal ROAS, so in this case, actually the POAS increased by almost 4% versus maximize conversions. So that was a pretty good success story using this. And if it's a large ad spend, 4% extra profit, that's a lot on the bottom line. But this is optimizations within the platform. And then it's all about how we actually measure it also in other channels and in the back end in that P&L. And we all know that both Google and Meta can take credit for the same conversion. That's why there is a lot of attribution tools. We also have one in profit metrics where we can show the real profit, the POAS, and so on. We can also show it down on order level and look at all the touch points. So with a linear model, we can see how much profit is credited to each channel. But what I will not state, as many other attribution tools will, is that they can track every single customer journey every single time, because then it would be full of shit. It's not possible because there is devices where people don't identify themselves, and this way two devices cannot be connected together. In Europe, there is GDPR with cookie banners. I also know there is. Don't you need cookie banners in California as well, Andrew? Yeah. So essentially, this is a sort of truth, but it will never be the full truth. So of course, this is where it can give a certain amount of credit if there is tracked certain clicks from different channels, and then it can divide that profit out. So it always match 100% in the bottom. So this is super great at mid and bottom funnel optimization. But where I believe the truth is, that is in the backend numbers. And that's also, again, coming back to what I didn't have when I was scaling that company so fast. I was waiting on a P&L. And we in Profit Metrics have P&L. You can also easily build something yourself, I think, using some APIs or in Shopify, if you're using Shopify. Essentially, what you need is something that tells you what actually happened today or the last week, like the final result. That this is where I believe this is where it starts and ends. So you can see if you have 5,000 orders this week, you will see 5,000 orders. You will see the gross profit. You will see the contribution margin, but the revenue is only there once and the ad spend is there once. You can even put in fixed cost in Profit Metrics so you can see the net profit. But this is the final number where there is no deceiving double attribution and so on. So I believe it's super important to always look at those backend holistic numbers, as well as everyone is using MER, blended ROAS. The same goes for blended POAS. The cool thing about these is if you're looking at blended POAS, it's all profit, but the orders are only there once, and then it's all ad spend once. So you have one blended number, and it's really, really good, in my opinion, to always have that control number. It's not telling you if it's Meta or Google or TikTok that is going good or bad, but it's telling you what everything is combined. So you always have that control number working on it. Another way of measuring, and that also goes a little bit maybe to incrementality, that is if there is a natural retention in the business. So I also had another company selling supplements where I had a protein powder factory. I knew that people were coming back if they bought once. So if you're actually getting new customers in, being able to measure the profit from new and existing customers, seeing what kind of profit do they actually bring the first 30, 60, 180 days. So you also know if you can be a little bit more aggressive on new customer acquisition and also always measure it. And when you are measuring new customers, make sure, again, it's on back end, that it's not some cookie in Google or Meta that are determining if it's new or existing, because those cookies can go away. So in Profit Metrics, we essentially look up if we have seen that hashed email before, and that will determine if they are new or existing. We also make it possible to optimize in, for example, Meta and Google with it. So again, it's based on the backend being sent in, and then we actually have custom conversions or custom events in Meta where it's new and existing customers based on profit and revenue. So you can optimize and have columns, either optimizing the algorithm, so you're optimizing for value, but also just separating them and not just trusting what the ad platforms are telling us. Because if you look in Google, we have found that 40% of what Google say are new customers are actually existing customers. And this is with setting up server-side tracking with all the best practicing. So if we were just optimizing for new customers in Google and thinking, okay, it's great, and we are paying much more, and 40% of them are actually existing, we will end up with problems later on because we are buying returning customers. And again, going back on backend, if we're doing things like new customer acquisition, we wanted to have more profit over time. So we're going really aggressive in Google and Meta, looking at that ad spend. Can we see some kind of correlation? Can we see a trend in the backend that actually there is coming new customers? So it's not just the ad platforms telling us, and both of them are essentially attributing to the same new customer. So always having that way of going back and looking at these holistic numbers and control that the ad platforms are not deceiving us, which they can in certain cases. And then another KPI I really, really love, and I believe in e-commerce, this should be the North Star of any e-commerce business, that is the contribution margin. And the reason for that is that the contribution margin is essentially is the revenue minus all of the variable costs. So all the product cost, shipping, packaging, handling, payment fees, and then minus all of the ad spend. So that's the free cash flow that needs to pay for the ad spend or for the fixed costs. So this is also where it's a whole way of working in the business. And the reason why I believe it's a North Star is, of course, a really good marketer can optimize the ad spend better and get more profitability out of the ad spend in different channels. But it's also something that procurement can work on. Maybe they have not negotiated the cost of goods. Maybe there is volume discounts they can get in or take bigger containers in. Maybe there haven't been negotiated shipping recently. Maybe they could put another shipping up as the free one or a default one. The same with payment providers. If we just put PayPal up on top, yeah, maybe it's easy, but it costs a lot more than in certain credit cards or Apple Pay. So it's also could be website optimization. If we can get more of the customers we have or visitors we are paying in the ad spend to convert or doing really good upsell and so on. Everything goes into optimizing the contribution margin. And if the contribution margin goes up, that's the best metrics to look at or prediction of that the company have long-term success. So it's just always focus on that KPI because that never deceive us. If we are starting TikTok, we are using a lot of ad spend, looks great in TikTok, we would essentially be able to see if the contribution margin go up or does it just cannibalize us some other sale? Are they just really good at retargeting or remarketing or and so on? We would be able to see that on the contribution margin, how it's trending. So I believe that contribution margin is just the best metrics to actually measure, and everyone should be optimizing for that because if it's trending upwards, you'll not end up in a situation like I did. That's essentially my presentation.
Well, it's so helpful. I think so much of this is and Jeff, by the way, thanks for being here. If you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat or whatever. But I think so much of it is it's a good run through of POAS and the way that it can help marketers. I think so much of the measurement stuff has been centered on it kind of goes in phases. More recently, it's been centered on incrementality. How do you think POAS plays into incrementality in terms of measurement and how it can help? Is POAS a better measurement in terms of, I mean, shorter term and like incrementality is sort of the overall journey, or how do you think about that?
I believe it's the same essentially that if you're doing, the best possible attribution you can do is incrementality test and geo holdout test and so on. Unfortunately, not a lot of business are doing it, or they are maybe doing it once or twice and testing it out. This should be something that should always be running, which is sometimes hard and is really never. It's very, very few companies I actually see invest in that regularly and always have it running on. But if you're doing incrementality test on revenue, that's again where I believe profitability is still using profit in the incrementality test. So essentially instead of using incremental ROAS, using incremental POAS, just using the profit because again, it could actually show a lot of incrementality, but is it just people who are buying on discount? Then we would have a high revenue, but maybe that will impact the bottom line again in a negative way, where here it's again apples to apples. It's ad spend and profit. That's what you can compare. You cannot really compare revenue unless you always have the same margin and you're not running discounts. So I believe revenue is important, but you also need that profit, and you can use it in incrementality test. We have seen many doing that as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think when people go through and start to utilize POAS, do they find that in the short term, sometimes things look worse? Just because it's an actual, I feel like people get built on false ideas of what's actually profitable, right? And so does it
Yeah, yeah.
sometimes look worse? And if so, like, how do you help them think about that?
I would say the easiest way to optimize to start with is essentially you remove the crap, because that is where when you see the profit up against ad spend, that is where within those target ROAS and within that revenue, it reveals where you're losing money. So often you see those 10, 15, 20% of that spend actually being unprofitable. You can turn that out off immediately. And of course, that would impact short term the revenue because you wouldn't get that revenue, but it's revenue you're losing money on every single ad dollar. But what happens is it also reveals where you have the scaling opportunities. So it's very rare that people actually go down and use less ad spend. They move it around because you will also find 10, 15, 20% there is more profitable. And they are often finding that they are using a way too high target ROAS. They don't need that high target ROAS, so they can move some of that money over. But the easiest way is to start by simply removing what is not working, which you couldn't really see on revenue. And that would, of course, short term remove some revenue there, but you will make it up really quick where you can
Sure.
allocate that
When
money better.
when people are using POAS more often, do you feel like they sort of also start to unlock different ways to think about uh financially around their business, like bundling, for example, or like what are the ways that, because I feel like POAS is one thing, like it's a measurement thing, but it's also it kind of reframes the whole way you think about this stuff. So what other things do people do that is surprising and really useful in your opinion?
Yeah, and that's where, of course, I should push really hard when I have to trademark on POAS all the time. But for me, POAS and ROAS, for that say, that's essentially an efficiency metrics. So where I want to push is for that people become more contribution margin focused. Because again, some believe, just like with ROAS, a high POAS is really, really good, but not necessarily because if you have a lower POAS, as long as it's profitable, you can increase that volume a lot if there is more volume to get in the ad spend. So it's like it's more starting to focus and always controlling the scale on the contribution margin. You can essentially lower the POAS and increase the ad spend as long as the contribution margin is trending upwards. So it's like you can work with the POAS or the ROAS for that sake, but always have the control on the contribution margin. So that's where we see many companies become much more brave because most companies have had some kind of incident like mine, not going bankrupt, but having that one where they get that months back where it's like, oh my God, what the hell happened there? Where they use too much money. And then they get a little bit more conservative in their spending. And that is essentially holding them back. Once they get that transparency in and saying, okay, we actually are making money. So it's actually not benefiting our company, not using more money, then they get more brave. So it's just the transparency just make everyone feel much better and much more in control. Um,
Totally, because it's real. I mean, it's like, yeah, yeah. Well, Frederik, super glad to have you on. If people have questions, you can get a hold of Frederik or you can contact me. I'm happy to put you in touch with him as you think about measurement. But thank you for your time today. Sorry for the technical issues on my end,
oh,
and hopefully we'll look forward to working with you as time continues to go on.
thank you, Andrew.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
Have a good day.